good afternoon, and welcome to LMR Live on location in New York City. It is an exciting day. We have Ole Miss in the Big Apple. So, this is our third LMR Live on location, and man, do we have a great show today. Sitting next to me is none other than the amazing concert pianist, Bruce Levingston. We're going to clap for him. Let's clap for him.
Thank you very much.
So, we do our thing here. We do edutainment. We want to hear from you today as this is taking place. Feel free to chat in YouTube, to post in Facebook, or to tweet. And I think the hashtag should be Ole Miss in the City. I've been using it. Feel free to use it too, because we are in the city. The big thing happening Monday night,
yes,
Bruce,
yes.
which is really the fundamental backbone of why we're here, is your concert.
Thank you. Looking forward.
Looking forward to
very
it?
Much, very much.
That's good.
Wonderful program that looks to liberty and celebrates some wonderful things in our state. The opening of the Civil Rights Museum, which is, I think, very important for us, and also the Mississippi Museum of History, and also our state's bicentennial. So I've commissioned 2 new works that I'm going to premiere there. So very excited about playing them along with Chopin and Rachmaninoff and Janacek and Liszt.
It's going to be an amazing program, and I want to say something about this man right off the bat, that you inspire so many of us in profound ways, and I'm not going to be able to touch on all of them today. But one of them is this, your pride about the state of Mississippi. And you do this wonderful job of lifting up what we represent on many platforms. But let's first talk about this artistically. So for the opening of the Civil Rights Museum, you had a work commissioned, yes?
2 works.
2 works. Would you talk a little bit about those?
Sure. Well, the fact that our state, which is an extraordinary place with a history of great talent and great beauty, but also with complexities and problems that, like really all states and other places in the nation, we grapple with difficult issues, and particularly issues of race. And I was so proud that our state came together to build and open this important museum of civil rights, that finally there was a place that people could see and learn about our very difficult history with the subject. And so I thought, as I saw this was going to be an important moment, that I wanted to commission something that would celebrate our state, but also somehow in sound memorialize the lives that were given and lived to make it possible for us to be where we are now, and that would somehow also make people think about what it is that we've been trying to come to grips with. And so I commissioned David T. Little, one of the outstanding composers in the country. I've known him for nearly 20 years, and I felt he's somebody that really cares about these important issues, but also has the means to write this kind of music. He wrote the opera JFK and Dog Days, just a brilliant composer, and a graduate of Princeton. And so when I spoke to him about it, he thought about this and, very aware that he had not gone through the civil rights era, didn't want to be presumptuous, but felt he had something.
And that's a difficult position to be in, really.
Very difficult.
To make sure you're doing it justice, and I can only imagine.
But I'm a big believer that that artists, as much as anyone, should be able to feel what others feel and express that in their art. And he's a particularly sensitive artist, and so he came to the subject of the Freedom Riders, and he felt this was such an incredible, nonviolent way to go and make a statement and take great risks. And many people were jailed, and yet they persevered. And so he captured in 6 movements this amazing work called Accumulation of Purpose. And in it, I think he captures some of the bittersweet moments and difficulties, but also some of the joys that came, the triumph of being heard and making a difference. And that is still, of course, very relevant today.
I think what you said, being heard, I think is so key.
Yes.
And, you know, something you and I have talked about before, the universal language of music.
That's right.
And the power that it has to make one feel and to connect people. So thank you for having the work commissioned to create that kind of emotional communication.
Yes.
Because that's what it is.
Yes. And I also commissioned, I wanted also to have a Mississippian, if possible, write something. And I had heard about 4 years ago a young composer named Price Walden. I think he's just, even now,
Well, he's
he's
a dear friend of LMR. I think Price is fantastic.
Yes. And
immensely talented.
Very young, and yet when I heard him, I realized even 4 years ago, maybe he was just 22, I thought, my goodness, this is an important voice, an important artist already, who's going to have a great career. And so we talked then even that one day we would do something, and as this came about, the commissioning of these works, I thought that I have to ask Price to do something. And he came up with the idea of writing something to memorialize the churches, the place, the sacred space, as it's called, and place and safe space that churches provided for people during the Civil Rights era, and particularly for African Americans.
Right.
And it was not absolutely safe, as we know, but safer.
Right.
And also a place of spiritual safety and sanctuary. And Price talked about how that also for him, the church had been a place of sanctuary, personally.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I thought that was incredibly moving. So in 3 movements he captures this, and the last is in fact a hymn, and with the subtitle, This World is My Home. And I think that's very special. What he's saying is that I have a place here. We all have a place here. And isn't that what the era was about?
Absolutely.
And so it's an incredibly beautiful piece, so I'm very proud to play that and be giving it its premiere at Carnegie Hall.
Well, a couple of things I want to talk about in relationship to that. You know, one, I think what I enjoy so much about Price's writing is he's so willing to go so deep and so personal in himself.
Yes, that's right.
He's so willing to share in that way, and I think that takes a very brave and special person to do that. And the other thing is to acknowledge something else that's great about you is your willingness to promote and encourage and uplift emerging artists.
Oh, thank
you know, that takes bravery.
Thank you.
And it takes selflessness, and it's appreciated. Wow. We appreciate it, don't we?
You're very kind, but it's a privilege for me to be able to play these great artists' works, and when I come across talented people, whether they're in music or anything else, I feel like if I can help in any way, that it's I'm honored to do it. And also, one feels so many people help me.
Well, that's what I would ask. Would you be willing to share with us anyone who, along your journey and path, who really just, I don't know, was that person who lifted you up?
There were many people. I mean, starting my first teacher, was my mother, and she had such a joy about music and playing, and my father loved music so deeply, and neither were professional musicians. But it was that sense of joy of making music and sharing it, but also other things, of paintings and books and flowers and nature and life. And it wasn't the Walton family, or I'm dating myself, but the Waltons and sense of it, something that was perfect, but in its way, it was stimulating and remarkable that they cared about beauty and saw that it was there everywhere, and encouraged me to see the beauty and hear the beauty. And so that was very important. And
it seems like there's a lot of cross-pollination there.
Yes.
You know, I think today, well, I shouldn't just say today, I find it interesting when people try to compartmentalize the different art forms.
Oh.
And how, you know, yes, there are the different art forms, but there's so much crossover in
it always has been.
Always.
You know, in each era you see, you know, in Renaissance or in the Romantic era or Enlightenment, or particularly in the Belle Epoque, all of the painters and writers and musicians that were working together. So I think this is very natural that one takes it as a whole, not just as things as
pieces.
Pieces.
Well, actually, Melanie had a question. She's to discuss, how do you draw inspirations from all forms of art? Because you do. I mean, in your artistic output, the crossover to art, the crossover to actors, the crossover to dance. I mean, you do it all.
Well, I'm inspired.
Or you collaborate with all.
I'm inspired by all those things, and as I've come to meet people from who work in different areas, it just feels very natural to say, would you like to work on a project? I think if you look at opera, you all, many of you are singers who are here, it's so collaborative. And it just doesn't rely on the singer, although very important. But also, you know, a set designer and lighting, and of course the director and
the orchestra.
And then each instrument can do something that's so extraordinary and create a life and a sensibility. And so.
Oh, I like that word,
You know,
a sensibility.
You know,
I mean, there really is a sensibility with
Of course.
the grandness of opera
yes.
that, you know, is unique.
That's right. And you know, we were talking in one class about how a different director may take a great Mozart opera and a completely different concept, even with the plot staying the same, depending on how you design something, because that director may have a different sensibility than another. And so I think that's what's exciting about all of these great pieces of music. That we hear. That's what you hear. We're live in New York. That's what you're hearing are the pipes, of course, in older buildings. That's the heating system, but that's music.
It is, and we were talking about that before the show started. The fact of music in nature, music in life. I mean, the sounds that one hears in New York City are very different than the sounds someone hears in the Delta, or the sounds someone hears in, I don't know.
Yes, and the Fosse. What's the famous steam heat?
Oh yes. We should break into song. Dance. Let's go.
Great. You know the song Steam Heat? It's just wonderful.
It's
and the
great.
The choreography is unbelievable.
It is exquisite. Yeah. It is. So let's talk a little bit more about your collaborations with prominent cultural institutions. I mean, you really have done a lot with art and music, whether that's the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of Art, and you're also an author and a curator.
Yes. But really inspired by, again, Mississippi, a famous Mississippi artist that I grew up seeing a lot, and felt I wanted to learn more about her, really. I knew the work as a child, but so that inspired me to come to write this. But you know,
yes, and the book is Bright Fields, The Mastery of Marie Hull. And for those who haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. Yeah. Oh, I need to give a shout out to our folks back in Oxford, Mississippi, who are watching in that auditorium. We send a hottie toddy. But if you're in Oxford, go to Square Books and pick up this book. I'm sure there are signed copies, right?
I hope so.
There better be. If not, we'll get a signed copy.
But the important thing is she, born in 1890, became an important artist. And it was even more difficult than it is now for women who were in that field.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, in that time, first of all, there weren't many schools of art to study.
That's
and
right.
then for a woman, I mean, didn't she go to the state of Pennsylvania?
She finally went to
study?
the Academy of Art there,
Yes.
which was really one of the great places to study in this country, and studied with William Merritt Chase, and then on to New York to the Art League, and then she went to Europe to study. But to do that, she had to do what her family felt she should do, which was to study music. She went to Belhaven, and at that time, a respectable young lady might, if she was going to work, and I say this all in quotes of that era, that, well, she would become a teacher, or she would become a piano teacher or music teacher, or play in church. Well, she took the money she earned from teaching and then went on to study art, because she knew this was really her greater calling, and became a very important artist and won many national and international awards. And is in, her work is in a number of museums. And I think that I just wanted people to know how extraordinary not only the work was, but how extraordinary she was.
Absolutely. But that's another thing you're good at, is seeking out individuals, whether past or present, who have made significant impact in the world and forged a path that makes easier for other people. And you really do.
Well,
I don't know
well,
whether
does
it happen naturally?
Isn't that what you're doing with LMR? So I think you
Well, I appreciate that.
It's an extraordinary voice that you give to people. But so you certainly have this.
Well, thank you.
And do this. And,
well, it's something I do believe in. And
yes.
And again, through the art of what you're exposing folks to, it gives a glimpse to history in a different way. And it draws people in. I think, again, back to how it's a mosaic, these different art forms. It's not like, oh, I appreciate music and I can't appreciate that. Or maybe I enjoy visual art more than I enjoy theater. It's fine, but just finding...
I don't think about all these things in any kind of specific way. I think that it is just, again,
it's who you are.
A sensibility.
It's who you are.
Well, you're right.
No, because I think when it's calculated, it's contrived.
I do.
Right. I mean, just my opinion. And it's not sincere, and it won't go the long haul.
No.
I think that's what's important when something is truly, I don't know, not to be too general, but organic and heartfelt. Then it goes the distance.
Yeah, and these things really are connected naturally, and they're there for anyone to see. And I think when you present them and people go to see art, you see Picasso's The Musicians, or even in the Enlightenment period, the musicians inside the paintings at the Met. It's fantastic. And
it is.
All of these artists were observing, and musicians were observing, and I think we're all doing one thing.
We are.
Yeah.
We are. And it's living, breathing art. This is going back to your concert at Carnegie on Monday. Lacey was curious, about your, I don't know if relationship's the right word. She actually said, what kind of performance opportunities have you found in conjunction with Carnegie Hall? Are there, what is that?
Well, I will be playing in a wonderful space. In fact, I went to hear Renee Fleming and Emmanuel Axe play when they opened it. And but both are great artists that I've also had the privilege of coming to know, and I just admire them so much as artists and people. And Zankel Hall is an extraordinary space that it's almost as if it had been inspired by Asian architecture. And the wood is exquisite, so it makes for an incredible acoustic. It's a very special place to play, and particularly if you're playing a piano concert. And so that it's not as like the Met, which is quite immense with thousands of seats. This is ideal, if you're playing. And so I find that that is an exquisite place to play. I've played there a number of times. And
I have not been in that hall before. This will be my first time.
It's wonderful.
And the students.
There's three halls in inside Carnegie Hall, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And there are just so many wonderful things always going on in each of them. But this is a particularly special place, and I've played in a lot of places around the world, but this is wonderful. And in some ways it reminds me of the halls that I've played in France and Italy, that the old kinds of halls, which are not too big, but they're exquisite. You know, even La Scala is not like it's immense.
But acoustically, I mean, the Met was designed perfectly for the voice to project. I mean, it amazes me if you're up in the peanut section, someone can shuffle their foot on the stage and you can hear it. You know, it's because it projects.
It's wonderful. I saw wonderful. When I first came to New York, I remember seeing The Ring, and tickets, they weren't inexpensive to me then, you know, and certainly still are not. They were quite up, maybe 4 or 5 up, and I could hear beautifully.
It's amazing.
It's perfect.
But for what you're describing, it would not. It would lose.
This is a lot of this music was meant. The Chopin, you know, I'm playing.
Oh no, you're fine.
Chopin, and you know. Some intimate Chopin piece, or that you get, you can hear and feel the nuances. You know, there's another one. Somehow you can hear these small nuances in a space that's not too big. So it's a magical place to play, and it's Carnegie Hall.
Yeah, it's Carnegie Hall, and this is the closest. I mean, we've collaborated, but I was standing over there, singing when you were playing. I love sitting here watching your hands.
Oh, thank you.
Don't you? Mm-hmm. I love it.
Did you see anything that? But
it's just your touch
of
the keys.
You know, that's the thing. You want people to. Almost to feel as you strike, because you know, if you're doing like a Scarlatti, you want to pop it with, you know, it's almost for the harpsichord, so a little. So it's got that almost this popping thing, but if it's like. I want it to kind of go the opposite direction. I want it to float up. And so I almost come off the keys anyway.
No, but it is. And many people have praised you for your. No, they have in reviews. Not that that's the end-all be-all reviews, you know. I don't know how you feel about them, but your touch with the keyboard and the way you're able to communicate.
Well,
and you know, it's going to be such a gift for these students that are here in New York with us to experience your concert in that space and to be part of history of the things that have been in that hall and to be intimate enough to catch some of those hands.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to playing.
So let's talk a little bit more about your collaborations in terms of commissions. We've talked about it a little bit, but you've commissioned, I mean, many folks to write pieces. Philip Glass, William Bolcom, James Matheson. What drives you to have these new works written?
Well, I mean, I remind people that Bach and Beethoven were modern composers at one time. And I think that, and I love playing their music, and Schubert and Schumann and so many other composers of the past, just about everybody. But I also want to know what's going on in my own time. And I feel that there are great voices writing and making art. And also, as I've come to know what was happening in the past, that those composers had relationships with other instrumentalists, that I want somehow, well, what if I interact with a composer? Will they write something about an idea that I have, not so necessarily that's written for me, but if I talk to them about something like the Civil Rights era, or about a beautiful painting, as we did a series of stained glass windows with Jim Matheson that you know about, or in the case of Bill Bolcom, I met him at the Chelsea Hotel, and of course I knew his music well. He's a famous composer.
I mean, and that's what connected you and I first.
I think that's right.
Because,
that's right.
because Bill and Joan were coming, and your name, I mean, it was just meant to be.
That's right.
That's what forged our first encounter.
I had gone to the Metropolitan Opera to, we'd met anyway. I lived at the Chelsea Hotel for a long time, and he and I talked there, and of course his wife's an amazing singer and performer. And so after some years, his opera was A View from the Bridge, inspired by Arthur Miller. I think Arthur Miller with Arnold Weinstein worked on the libretto together, but originally it was from the Arthur Miller play, and so there was a piece called New York Lights in there, and it was just a heartbreaking piece, and in fact had been done, the premiere was only months after 9/11. So as we heard it, people were just in tears. All of us just listening to this exquisite piece, but talking about those New York lights.
Right.
And that quite a moment. And it was not in the original that I believe he had done for the Lyric in Chicago. And so I saw him after. I said, "Oh, this piece is unbelievable. I just wish it had been written for the piano." And
you planted a seed.
6 months later, I received this beautiful package from Italy, and I opened it, and there was in his beautiful calligraphy a piano transcription of his work, New York Lights. And so then I played it the next year at Lincoln Center and gave it the piano version its premiere, and I've since recorded it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you played it for us.
And I think, and then I played it.
Yes.
That's right, with Joss.
Yes, with Joss.
The original with the piano voice. It was a wonderful work.
So Bill Bolcom was key in my development. Different, not as profound, but I'll never forget when my teacher at Carnegie Mellon. This was when the cabaret songs were first coming out, and she said, "I have these pieces that I've been holding on to, and I think you're the right person." And I'll never forget learning those and just feeling like, yes, because it was this first time that a classical composer creating song and in a way that was outside of the box, and I was like, "Oh, my kindred spirit!" And it just meshed and merged.
And Arnold's amazing lyrics are there.
Amazing lyrics.
That's right.
And you're talking about working with these composers. That was the inspiration behind LMR initially. Was this idea of mine, or desire of mine to connect with these living composers, and to really have the opportunity to collaborate and communicate about what was intended, as opposed to just the disengagement of I'm going to read about it, or it's filtered through someone else.
Right.
So, and hopefully creating those experiences now for our students at the University of Mississippi. We had a little fun with one of your pieces. So your CD Windows.
Yes.
And the selections written by Matheson.
Oh, right. Okay.
And the window from the Union City.
It's called the Union Church.
Thank you.
Peconico Hills.
Yes.
In upstate New York.
Upstate New York. And please correct me if I don't articulate this correctly, but the window was commissioned.
Well, it was commissioned by the Rockefellers, and that grand window is the Good Samaritan,
Mm-hmm.
and it is extraordinary. And of course, it's by Chagall.
Yes.
And Marc Chagall.
So again, we get the crossover here, but we have this window that was commissioned by Chagall for this church.
It's commissioned
by wrong.
by the Rockefellers.
By the Rockefellers for Chagall to do the window.
Correct.
Woo! I'll get it eventually.
Well, it is
Thank good you're here to translate.
It is
Woo!
and they did it as a memorial. They commissioned a whole series of windows, which is extraordinary. And they'd also commissioned Matisse.
Yes.
That one was in memory of David and Nelson Rockefeller's mother, and the other siblings, of course, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, who was a founder of the Museum of Modern Art.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is an extraordinary little church that the townspeople and the family go to in Conoco.
Mm-hmm. And then, so share with us the inspiration behind the creation of the work with Matheson.
So the church was about to celebrate its centenary, 100 years of its founding, and that was 1915. And David Rockefeller was also, who played a major role in the commission of those windows, was also about to have his 100th birthday.
Oh my.
And he and his wife had been longtime friends of mine, and David was particularly a great supporter of my commissioning work, and as much as anything, spiritually supportive. His family had been so involved in supporting the arts in New York, and he was one of those figures that you were asking about,
mm-hmm.
that made a difference. He and his wife had people like Alicia Della Roca and Pablo Casals, the great cellist, and
mm-hmm.
Arthur Rubinstein, and come to play in their home, and great friends with Rudolf Serkin. And so music was a big part of their lives, and at a time when people pushed and pushed and pushed for you to play, particularly when I first came to New York, this was in vogue, the biggest and loudest and most technically showy thing. It was David who said, but playing beautiful music beautifully. What he meant was great music, the Schubert, Chopin, things that I really love to play and would play for them. He said, playing beautiful music beautifully is the art, and this is what you do and what you can do. And it gave me the confidence to program more as I do.
A reflection of yourself.
Yes,
Yes.
And not be afraid. I remember when I first played Satie the first time in public. I was playing at Lincoln Center, and it was a big hall, and I was very nervous that the music that would not project,
right,
and that it might be so intimate. And of course, I knew it was beautiful, but I thought this is not going to work. But I tried it, and first I remember the utter silence of the audience, and then afterwards, you could feel that they had gotten it, and people came up again and again that said that they were so moved. It's so rarely done because there's always Debussy or Ravel, and this is a small repertoire that just is a little. Sometimes Satie said, I don't want to take Debussy's sun. I just want a little of his shade.
I like that.
And even in their lifetimes, they knew one another, and Debussy actually admired Satie and orchestrated two of the Gymnopédies. But anyway, I ended up learning to listen, I think, to my soul.
And I think that's really important for our students to hear, and even at my point, I think that's something to always remember. We're especially for the students, you're always being told what to do. And you have to really listen to yourself and what do you do well? What are you drawn to? What is going to showcase your talent, as opposed to just trying to fit? You can't fit a round peg in a square hole,
Yeah, I think there is a tendency that I think it's important when you're a student to try to learn each style and try to have some proficiency in each style. But we all, I think, have a particularly special voice in certain areas. And I think, when I think of the great artists, there are certain artists I would really rather hear in this period than this period. And I think we all feel that. And most of those great artists have focused on these things. It's not that they can't play.
Of course not.
Someone who can play Beethoven can probably play Prokofiev, but many of the great Beethoven players are also focus on maybe a little more on that era.
Yes.
And today, again, it's pushed that we should do everything, but I think sometimes to listen to yourself. Anyway, back to the window.
Back to Windows. So the CD came out just in 2000.
It came out in January of
this year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what we did is we enlisted a few public school teachers. We had a high school teacher at Olive Branch actually show that teacher did not see the window, sorry. They did not see the picture, just played the piece, The Good Samaritan. And we asked these students to come up with a title for it or their reactions. And I just want to share some of them because to me, this sums up so much of why we do what we do. Creating a connection with young people, all people, but creating a connection to young people and letting them feel something that they might not otherwise, or it opens up. So one student wanted to name it Miracle.
Wow.
I love this piece. It reminds me something magical and loving. It makes me happy to feel like a child again. It makes me want to cry because it reminds me of my childhood and my past.
Wow. Beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Beautiful.
I mean, very vulnerable. Another student, the student didn't see the...
And also very apt for this.
Yes.
Something about that window.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another student wrote, the title would be Edge of the Journey. Going through everyday life, trying your hardest to do all the right things, and sometimes failing along the way, but still holding on to some kind of hope that things will be all right in the end, and then one day your life is done, and you're on your last breaths thinking what you could have done better, who you could have been, and then everything you've ever done, never done, flashes before you, and you're gone. I mean, I'm like, I was impressed. And this is one of our...
Also, this is a tribute, I think, also to Jim Matheson.
Yes.
That he wrote this music that captured something that's more than just the notes, obviously.
Absolutely. I mean, they so vividly, all of them, and we got so many.
These are
many stories. And I pulled
special listeners,
this.
though.
Yes. Well, they have great teachers. They have some of our alums working with them.
Wonderful.
But just beautiful. Now, we also had some middle schoolers in Brandon, Mississippi. These are students of Rachel Dennis.
Great.
Remember Rachel?
Yeah, of course.
And these students did see the window as they listened to the piece. Her students talked a little bit more specifically about the music. A student named Melanie wrote, the dynamics changed to loud. That's when I thought, oh no. I started to think something had happened. The dynamics go from soft to loud, like something is continuing to happen over and over. It's like no one is helping him. I began to think something bad had happened to that person. Well, it was for a sixth grader.
Yeah. Well,
sixth grader.
It's the crucifixion is depicted, you know.
Yes. Yes.
As well as through the something of what the Good Samaritan spoke, you know. A lot is in that window.
A lot. A lot. And Claudia at Olive Branch Middle School, a student named Charity, felt that the piece was about a blind girl who can't see but feels all these profound emotions in her mind.
Wonderful.
What I love about these is that I find, and you've heard me say it before, I will say it again, I think our young people are today not okay with being with their own thoughts a lot. There's all the distractions. And one of the things I love about listening to this piece, even myself, that it creates an environment where one can really be reflective and thoughtful. And yes, it's inspired by this beautiful stained glass window, but to look all the different places that it takes one on this emotional journey. And there's no right, there's no wrong, but What a wonderful way to explore your own thoughts and where you stand, what you feel, what you believe. I just
Right.
feel that the music can serve such a profound purpose.
Sure. No, it's also each listener brings their own experiences
Yes.
and needs, and but the music can take you places. I think sometimes we can't just take ourselves.
No, we can't.
So,
Absolutely. And the way and your approach to it.
well, thank you.
I mean, it's
Thank
it's
you.
it's all of it. Let's talk a little bit more of some of your other collaborations with dance, with the Boston Ballet, and Alessandro Ferri.
Do you need to come in? We're really it's live. It's a live.
No, that's great. I'm just sitting right here.
Okay. Our audience.
Your draw to collaborating with dance.
Yes.
Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that I've always loved dance, as long as I can remember, and of course it's so influenced by music, every dance form, and so I particularly love ballet, and so much classical music has been used in ballet, so
Yes.
it's a clear synergy. But I had the opportunity to perform with American Ballet Theatre in 2007. Philip Glass had written a solo piece for me, and then they wanted to turn that into a ballet, and so asked me to perform on stage live with the dancers, and one of the great ballet companies in the world. And in that cast appeared Herman Cornejo, one of the great superstars of the ballet world, and we became good friends and felt a certain simpatico and connection as people, and also as artists. He felt the music as I played it, and we said we'll do something one day. And so at some point a few years later, I was playing at Carnegie Hall, and Herman came backstage with Alessandra Ferri. Alessandra, one of the greatest ballerinas.
Oh my goodness! And you brought her to Oxford.
Yeah, I did, and both of them, in
Yes.
fact. Yeah. And so they are extraordinary artists and performers, but Alessandra, is a deep person and dancer, and she walked backstage and she says, "This is it." She's from Italy, and she said, "We're doing this," and and so they were saying that they wanted me to do a performance with them, and that turned into a multi-year project that is still, we're going to be performing together at the Royal Opera House in London in January of 2019.
Okay, we need to start saving our money, and we'll road trip, airplane.
And we have performed together in South America and in Italy and France, and of course in all kinds of places here in the United States. And so, but the opportunity to work with great dancers is so special for me as an instrumentalist, because how they express a phrase with their arm, their foot. I remember seeing the great choreographer Jerome Robbins outside of Brooklyn Academy of Music. This was in, I believe, the 80s when Atisse was being performed by Les Arts Florissants, and Atisse by Jean-Baptiste Lully. And so this work, very, very old work from many centuries ago. And here is one of the great Broadway choreographers who's done On the Town and West Side Story. And I met him before, and we talked a bit. And so I walked up to him and I said, "Jerry, you're here at Atisse?" And he said, "Yes, I've come to every performance. I'm studying how they trill with their feet." And so here, he was maybe 80 at the time. He might have been very close, still learning, still seeking.
But that's all great people.
Yeah, of course.
All accomplished great people are always
absolutely.
learning. The desire, it
Yes.
never leaves.
Yes,
That-
but particularly learning from dance in this
Yes.
case. And for me too, working with particularly these great dancers, as they phrase something and as we work together to express things, yeah, it's been a great journey, and I have learned so much.
You know, you're making me think of something that I've taken for granted, because I think this mentality can work the other way too. I'm not a dancer, but I've studied a lot of dance, loved ballet, and I was lucky. All of the ballet training I did growing up was with a live pianist. So this is just dawning on me that I was around beautiful classical live classical piano music, 4 times a week in that class. That doesn't happen. That's rare to have that anymore. Everything's pre-recorded, but it works both ways. The energy and nuance of the live musician and then the dancer. It is reciprocated.
Yeah, absolutely. How also even how we space in the Scarlatti I was doing. It's almost a dance for your fingers, but you're still thinking that what were the feet doing when he was thinking of a dance, and that helps you in your approach and your spacing.
I'm going to bring up Melanie here for a moment, a member of our dream team. This comes up in the voice studio, because so much of what we do as singers, she's hiding her face right now, but so much of what we do as singers we can't see. We don't have as much of the tactile as the piano or the clarinet. And I believe dance is so important in feeling the rhythm, and that in terms of preparing the breath, the length of the phrase, it completely transfers to the singer's world. And I was making her, she kept telling me, I'm not a dancer. I said, I'm not trying to make you a dancer, but we have to be able to dance and feel, and the rhythm, it has to be in the body.
Yes.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Another group you like to collaborate with are actors.
Yes.
Ethan Hawke.
Yes.
Will you talk about that? I'm a huge Ethan Hawke fan.
We
I met him once.
Yeah.
Back when he was at Carnegie Mellon University, before he hit stardom. The hallway of Margaret Morrison dorms.
Great, Ethan's a great guy, and I knew him from our time. We met before, but particularly came to know each other well when we were both living at the Chelsea Hotel.
Chelsea Hotel again.
And yes, it was such a wonderful, special place. In the time I was living there, Virgil Thompson was still alive and living there, and so many great writers and musicians. And so Ethan moved in at some point, and he would come over and I'd play for him. And we were talking about Allen Ginsberg, and he loved Ginsberg's work and the poetry. And I said, talking about one particular piece, and I said, I have the score that Philip Glass wrote for this poem. And we decided we'd get together and take a look at this. And then eventually we performed it live at Lincoln Center together. And I remember Ethan had been on a shoot somewhere, and he said, I'm only wrapping the day before, and I won't have a lot of time before I'm coming in literally in the evening. Do you think we have enough time? I said, well, let's just do it, and we'll get together and we'll make this work. And so he came over and he sat in a chair very close to the piano the way you are. First he sat down and played himself a piece he'd been working on the piano, which was wonderful. He's a terrific musician and can play and write and sing, and of course he's a wonderful novelist. And so he kind of whispered the words in my ear as I played, and they were so right. We just looked at one another and went, wow. And we kind of gathered up our things. We knew that there was this, again, we felt it the same way. And we knew one another pretty well by this point. And so he went on stage, and that's how he performed it. As I said, just do it as you did it in my ear. And he almost whispered it. And you heard this, the audience was just rapt by him. And so some years later, I was doing an all Philip Glass album, and I said, would you? And he said, yes, I would. And so that we ended up recording it together, and we're just so pleased to be able to finally put it on, an album. And
now, did I read or hear correctly? You did that in one take.
I can
I
tell you
swear
that
I
we
read
did,
that somewhere.
We it's essentially a take, but we did 5 takes of the piece.
Okay, because
together.
I thought I read that somewhere.
I mean, it is essentially a take. The editors may well have put a final note or something, but his performance of it is a take, and it's pretty amazing.
It's an amazing performance.
Yeah.
I used it in the classroom,
Yeah.
and because it's an anti-war poem if you don't know it, and it really is applicable to today in so many ways, and it's allowed for some conversations to occur in classes that I don't know, it created a platform for people to open up about certain topics, and these are some honors college students who had reactions to it. One student said it was very empowering to listen to the poem with Ethan Hawke's narration. I find it is easily identifiable to find a parallel to the war on terror or crisis in Syria. The statement, quote, "I lift my voice aloud, make mantra of American language now, I here declare the end of the war," quote, can essentially be applied to any military conflict that the U.S. has faced.
And I think it's not just in the U.S. I think it's it's a poem for peace.
Yes.
And there's also the moment when he chants the names of gods from many religions. I think that's very important.
Absolutely. That's the other thing. It works well in this Honors 102, where we discuss, nature, the cosmos, and science. It really, because it does, it's pulling all those and how much we really do have in common, and we're after, peace.
Yes, and I think that's, but I particularly think that by Ginsberg naming the many gods and celebrating them, it's a sense of also acceptance of other cultures and many religions, and a respect, even if it's not your religion, there's a respect for the right of other religion and other views to exist. And that sense of respect is, I think, very important. And
very important. Some students wrote about how, in terms of the language, how nowadays with social media, people hide behind that platform and using it in a way that can...
Oscar Wilde famously said, if you give somebody a mask, they'll show you their true face. And so I think that sometimes people do hide, behind screens. And but I'm hopeful. I'm an optimist, and I feel this country has struggled just as in our home state in Mississippi. We struggle with issues, but I thought with the opening of the Civil Rights Museum and other things, we try to find our way, and I love that about this country. It goes through terrible things, but it is always trying to right itself. And
absolutely, I couldn't agree more. It's yes, and it's those occurrences and those moments that bring hope. We're reflective and seeking, and that's also, I think, in this country's DNA. Definitely.
And so.
Definitely. Well, thank you for doing a work like that, though, that again creates this environment and platform to have a discussion that might not otherwise occur. That's the key.
Thank you.
It might not otherwise occur. Okay,
we
always have a little fun on LMR Live. We're having fun already. I don't know what I'm talking about, but we're gonna up the ante. We're gonna shift to our game here. I'll explain a bit after our little intro video into. So we are going to play Bruce's musical timeline. So we're gonna get inside, I guess, your playlist a bit here. We're gonna go through your life. So I gave him some prompts. This game was created with Faith Janicki, and some prompts that are going to be on the screen here. 7 different categories and asked Mr. Levingston to share with us the piece that most embodies this. And he sent them back to us in a mixed up order. And then the dream team...
At your request.
Yes, yes, because the game part is the team trying to figure out which piece works with which prompt.
Okay.
So, our first prompt, do we have it up on the screen there, Melanie? All right. First prompt is the first piece you can remember. Now, the students, they seem to think the first piece that you remember is the Schumann.
Wrong.
Wrong! Okay, see, this is what's going to make it fun. This is a side of you that our audience is going to enjoy.
See my own choices?
Yes, you're going to have all my chicken scratch here. So,
I
yes.
just want to see what I said myself.
So, what would be your choice for...
No, so now I should tell them?
Yes, tell them just for that one.
Alouette.
That's what I thought. Hey, Jocelyn, can you pull it up on your screen? So,
I don't.
okay, that's all right. That's all right.
Because my mother sang it to me.
Oh.
So I remember but I used to have a tiny record player, and I almost thought that this was the first, but I really remembered my mother when I was. I don't want to say the age. I was so young, but I remember quite clearly her singing.
Oh.
Probably I was 2-ish, but by the time I was 3, I was playing this little record player, and Victor Herbert's "Babes in Toylands" was something I would put on over and over and listen to it, and was just fascinated by the orchestra and the different sounds. So, anyway, next.
I love Victor Herbert.
Yeah, of course. It's
Yes.
fantastic.
The next one is your favorite childhood song, and they thought that was going to be the Alouette. So
Wrong again.
that one's wrong. What would that be, Bruce?
What do you think it was? That's the important thing.
I think it was the Debussy.
Wrong again.
Oh my goodness! You think you know a person?
No, my favorite childhood song was the 59th Street Bridge song.
Really?
Garfunkel.
Okay, we thought that was going to be later. Really?
True.
How fun!
I loved their music,
Yes.
and it was hard for me to say it was just that. The Sound of Silence, and so many I Am a Rock, and
Yes.
on and on of that era. My brother played these pieces. My brother was extraordinarily advanced on musically anyway. I mean, he played classical music, but also knew a lot of music of the era, but was younger to be playing those things, and yet I would hear them, and so this was my, I sang all those things.
Oh my goodness!
Badly, but so that was
well, we're not doing very well, but we're finding out wonderful, interesting things about Bruce. All right, what was on your high school mixtape? They guessed the Simon and Garfunkel, which is wrong yet again. We're consistent, if nothing else. We're consistent. Let's rethink it, folks. What do we think? What do we think? What do we think? I'm going to go with Schumann?
Wrong again. Sorry. Well,
this is what makes it fun, though.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
Yeah, when I got this, I just say this to the audience. I was like, really? I have to do this?
Hey, yes.
But it's okay. You asked, so I'm telling you.
No, this is fantastic.
All right. Scriabin's 10th Sonata.
Interesting.
Scriabin had synesthesia and heard in colors. And I particularly loved the 10th Sonata and Vers la Flamme, the late works, and that are almost expressionistic, not just impressionistic, expressionistic, and the pushing the boundaries of sound. And he used he described things sometimes, in terms of blinding light, and but. I love the third sonata and fifth sonata and others, but the 10th I was fascinated with, and it took me a while to not only hear it but to play it, to grasp what was going on. It can seem abstruse, but it's actually in perfect sonata form. But there it was in my.
See, no, but this creates more conversation and detail than if we would have gotten them right.
Yeah.
I like it. I like
Just
it better.
about hearing colors,
Yes.
and that also affected my sense of playing. And
All right, the piece that got you through college, they thought the Poulenc Nocturne.
yeah, wrong again. So no, that would be the Chrysleriana, a piece in fact inspired by literature, an E.T.A. Hoffmann, essentially a novella called Cachemire, which means Mirror the Cat. Mm-hmm. And you all must have looked this up, but in it, Hoffmann is describing a particular Kapellmeister named Chancellor, he owns the cat, and he decides to write his autobiography. And then at night, the cat comes in and flips over the pages and writes his, and this all gets published together. And Schumann captured this in a magical piece. And this was a piece I loved and learned and was passionate about and have since recorded.
Ah! All right. Very quickly to close things out, your workout selection, we all thought Beethoven.
That would, right.
We got one right! We got one right! We'll all be working out to it later.
Oscar Levant was once stopped, a wonderful pianist, and appeared in a number of movies playing Gershwin's music, but he could play well. And he was stopped by a policeman once speeding. And he said, "Sir, do you know that you were speeding?" And he said, "Yes. How can one possibly go slow listening to the last movement of the Beethoven 7th Symphony?" And
that's great. All right, so then your guilty pleasure piece, the only one we haven't selected was the Debussy, right?
No.
No, wait, did we already do that one?
No, but is that your last question?
Yeah, the last one was the guilty pleasure piece.
No, you have a de-stress happy place piece.
Oh, I skipped one.
So do you want me to tell you?
Yes,
do you want me to
tell us both.
Okay, so the de-stress happy place piece, I can't say it's totally de-stress. And these two are really related. They could have been, they're interchangeable. But Debussy's Children's Corner is remarkable because it's not a piece for children to play. It's a piece like the scenes of childhood. It's actually quite difficult to play. But it captures memories of childhood, and there's a kind of innocence in this piece that's so special. So one of my favorites is Jumbo's Lullaby, is a little stuffed elephant. He wrote this for his daughter, but not to play, but to hear. Mm-hmm. And so you get the little ambling of an elephant, and the back and forth, or the serenade for the doll, or the snow is dancing. These are fantastic pieces too. There's great music, and so that takes me to a special place. And the guilty pleasure piece, Francis Poulenc, another French composer, though he was born after the Belle Epoque, he was influenced by it. And the music, if you hear Poulenc's music, you somehow are sitting in the 1920s in a cafe in Paris, and it is just an era of elegance and beauty and the music and love and a little melancholy. It's all there together. And so,
well, I just have to say, I think this was a home run in terms of getting a glimpse, Bruce. I appreciate you being sharing this with us. So our time has gone so quickly, and I want to thank many people. I want to thank those watching and our friends of the Living Music Resource. We are thrilled that you are experiencing edutainment with us and helping us to make the University of Mississippi a 21st century portal for music research. I want to thank the Yoknapatawpha Arts Council, the University of Mississippi Music Department, the Ole Miss Choir, the Honors College, and the Inn at Ole Miss for your continued support. I want to thank the Dream Team. I have 4 of the members here: Jocelyn Santabria, Ava Street, Lacey Heineman, and Melanie Colhane. And I want to thank Faith Janicki back in Oxford. If you want to stay up to date on our activities, please like our Facebook page and, engage with us. We want to hear from you. I also want to thank Augusta Gross for opening her home here in New York City and allowing us to film.
Indeed.
And we're going to be putting up an interview between Bruce and Augusta in the future days, and just so appreciative for her warmth and allowing us in her home.
And I want to thank you, Nancy Mariah, for having us on your wonderful program. I think it's so important. You really are a visionary and showing the way of communicating in our era and opening doors for not only young artists but old artists and everybody who loves music and art and life. So
thank you. That really means a lot. And I want to thank you. One of the best things that happened is you becoming part of the University of Mississippi.
Thank you very much.
And I feel honored to consider you a colleague and a dear, dear friend.
Same.
So, if you are in the New York City vicinity, where are you going to be Monday night? You are going to be at Carnegie Hall hearing the Bruce Levingston. See ya!
Bye.